The barn door had swollen in the damp, and when I pulled it shut behind me, it dragged across the floor with a low scraping sound. I remember that sound better than almost anything else from that evening. My hands still smelled of harness leather and machine oil. There was a broken singletree on the workbench, 3 nails lined up beside my hammer, and my oldest daughter was standing near the grain bins with both hands folded so tightly in front of her that her knuckles had gone white. She was 22 that autumn, old enough to make her own choices, old enough, I believed, to know exactly what she was doing. But when she finally looked at me, I realized I had spent years knowing what work she could do, what rules she understood, what was expected of her, and almost no time asking what she was carrying inside. What she told me in that barn was not loud. That is why it cut so deep. My name is Jonas. I am a husband, a father, and the head of an Amish household. I have spent most of my adult life believing that a good father provides, teaches, corrects, protects, and keeps his family pointed in the right direction. I still believe those things matter, but I learned in that barn that a man can do every one of them and still miss something important. If you have ever had a child tell you something you should have noticed on your own, stay with me. And if these stories help you understand this life from the inside, you are welcome to subscribe and tell me in the comments what you think a father owes his grown children besides food, shelter, and instruction. That day had started before 5. It was late October, cold enough that the water pump handle stung my palm, but not cold enough for frost to stay once the sun came up. We had a wagon wheel to reset, 2 calves that needed moving, and a roof seam on the machine shed that had started leaking. I had written the work in my head before breakfast. I often did that. I liked knowing where the hours were going. There is comfort in a list when you are responsible for many people. My daughter, Leah, had always been dependable. I do not mean that as a small compliment. In our home, dependability carries weight. She could handle a team, bake 6 loaves without measuring twice, patch a torn dress, keep younger children moving through chores, and notice when an older neighbor needed help before anyone asked. When she was little, she followed me everywhere. If I was mending fence, she carried staples in a tin cup. If I was greasing a wheel hub, she stood on an overturned bucket and watched. When she was about 9, she once spent nearly an hour trying to drive a crooked nail into a scrap of pine because I had done it and she wanted to do the same. I remember being proud of that. As she grew older, I began to treat that strength as if it did not require anything from me. That was one of my mistakes. Strong children can make a father lazy in a way he does not notice. If a child cries, you ask what hurts. If a child rebels, you ask what is wrong. But if a child works, obeys, helps, and keeps quiet, you tell yourself everything must be fine. Leah had been quieter for several months, not withdrawn exactly. She still came to meals, still helped her mother, still went where she was expected to go. But there were little things. She stayed longer in the wash house after everyone else had gone. She volunteered for errands that took her away from the house. At supper, she listened more than she spoke. Once I came through the kitchen and saw a half-written letter on the table. She folded it before I could see the name. I noticed all of that. I did nothing with it. I told myself she was 22 and had thoughts of her own. I told myself a father does not need to pry. I told myself young adults have seasons when they become private. Those things can all be true. They can also be excuses. 2 weeks before the barn conversation, her mother told me Leah had been sleeping poorly. I remember nodding while sharpening a plane blade. I asked whether she was sick. My wife said she did not think so. I said perhaps the colder weather would help her sleep. That is the kind of answer a man gives when he wants the problem to be small. The truth is, I was busy. That sounds weak when I say it now, but it was true. We had lost part of the corn crop to standing water in spring. A customer had delayed payment on a large carpentry order. One of our horses had gone lame for nearly 10 days. I had numbers in my head every morning. Feed cost, lumber cost, the amount still owed on a piece of equipment we shared with another family. I was thinking about winter before autumn had finished. I believed my burden gave me permission not to notice hers. That evening, after supper, Leah asked whether I could come to the barn with her. She did not say why. I remember feeling a small irritation because I had planned to finish repairing that single tree before the light was gone. I hate admitting that. My daughter asked for my time, and my first thought was about a piece of wood. We walked out together. The yard was muddy from 2 days of rain. I could hear one of the horses shifting in its stall and the soft clink of a chain against the wall. The barn smelled of hay, wet wool, and the sharp sweetness of grain dust. There was still enough gray light coming through the west opening to see without a lantern. I picked up the single tree and looked at the split. Leah stood near the bins. I asked what she needed. She did not answer right away. That was the moment I should have set the wood down. Instead, I turned it over in my hands and studied the crack. Finally, she said, "Dad, I don't know how to tell you anything unless I already know you will approve." That was the one sentence. Nothing dramatic followed it. No shouting, no accusation, no threat to leave that night. Just those words, spoken quietly in a cold barn. I set the single tree down. There are things a father can answer quickly. If a child asks how to tighten a trace chain, you show them. If they ask how much seed goes into a row, you tell them. If they break something, you decide whether it was carelessness or an accident. Practical questions reward certainty. Her words did not. My first instinct was to defend myself. I could feel the answers rising before I had even thought them through. I wanted to tell her she had always been allowed to speak. I wanted to remind her of the choices we had let her make. I wanted to list the times I had listened. I wanted to explain that every household has standards and that a father cannot apologize for having them. All of those thoughts came in less than 5 seconds. I am grateful I did not say them. Instead, I leaned against the workbench and looked at her. She was not angry. That almost made it worse. Anger gives you something to push against. She looked tired. She began telling me, slowly, that for years, she had learned to bring me finished decisions instead of unfinished thoughts. If she was unsure about something, she went to her mother first. If she was frightened, she waited until the fear passed. If she disagreed with me, she usually stayed quiet until she could make her disagreement sound like a question. She said she had become very good at knowing what answer I hoped to hear. I felt my face grow hot even though the barn was cold. I asked her whether I had frightened her. She said not in the way I meant. That answer stayed with me. I had never struck her. I had never threatened to throw her out. I had never told her she was worthless. In my mind, those facts had always been proof that I was a steady father, but fear has more than one shape. A child can fear disappointing you. A grown daughter can fear changing the way you see her. Someone can sit at your table every day and still believe that your love feels safest when they are making the choices you would make. She told me she had been considering taking a job for a season with relatives in another settlement. It was not forbidden. It was not some wild plan. She wanted time away from the routines of our household to think about what she believed, what kind of work she wanted to do, and what she hoped for in the next part of her life. She had been thinking about it for almost 4 months. 4 months. I had eaten across from her hundreds of times in those months. I had asked whether the potatoes were done, whether the washing was brought in, whether a younger child had finished a chore, whether she could help on Saturday. I had not once asked whether she was happy. That realization did not arrive like lightning. It arrived heavier than that. It settled. I asked her why she had chosen the barn. She looked around and said she knew I would be there working alone. That hurt too. She had not chosen the kitchen because there might be interruptions. She had not chosen the porch because others might hear. She had chosen the place where she knew I would be because work was the easiest way to find me by myself. I thought about all the years she had followed me into that barn as a child. Back then, I had taken her questions seriously because they were about things I understood. Why does a horse foam at the bit? Why does wet hay heat up? Why do we oil leather? Why do some boards warp and others stay straight? At 22, her questions were larger, and I had made myself harder to approach. I wish I could tell you I handled the rest of that conversation perfectly. I did not. A few times I started explaining before she had finished. Once I asked whether someone had put these ideas in her head. I heard the suspicion in my own voice and regretted it as soon as the words were out. She did not need an interrogation. She needed a father. So I tried again. I asked what she wanted me to understand. She said she did not want to leave us. She wanted room to know whether the life she was living was also a life she was choosing. That distinction mattered. In our community, choice is not always spoken about the way outsiders speak about it. We grow up inside a way of life. Family, church, work, language, clothing, expectations. They are not separate boxes. They are woven together. That can create a deep sense of belonging. It can also make questions feel dangerous when a person thinks asking them might sound like rejecting everything. I'd always wanted my children to value what we gave them. Somewhere along the way, I had started confusing gratitude with agreement. That was my failure. Not that my daughter had questions, not that she wanted to spend a season elsewhere. My failure was that she had carried those questions for 4 months because she believed she needed to prepare them before bringing them to me. When she was small, I had taught her that if she was lost in a field or woods, she should stop moving and call out. I told her never to hide because she was afraid of being scolded. I told her that being found mattered more than being right. Standing in the barn, I realized I had not lived by my own lesson. I had become so focused on guiding my children that I had forgotten they sometimes needed to be found. We talked until the barn was dark enough that I could barely see the grain bins. I lit the kerosene lantern hanging near the door. The flame came up low and yellow. Dust moved through the light in tiny pieces. I asked questions I should have asked months earlier. Was she unhappy at home? Sometimes. Did she feel she could return if she left for a season? She hoped so. Was she questioning her faith? Some things, yes. Did she think I would love her less if she came to different conclusions than I had? She paused too long before answering. That pause was harder than any sentence she could have spoken. I do not remember every word from the rest of the evening. I remember the feeling in my chest. It was the feeling of discovering a weak beam in a building you thought was sound. From the outside, the wall still looks straight. The roof is still standing. But once you see the split, you cannot pretend it is not there. I had built much of my fatherhood around responsibility. I provided. I expected work. I corrected bad behavior. I taught what I believed. I kept my word. Those are good things. I am not ashamed of them. But responsibility without relationship can become cold. A child may respect you and still hide from you. They may follow your rules and still believe their real thoughts are unwelcome. That night, I understood that authority can keep a household orderly, but authority cannot make a grown child trust you with the truth. Trust has to be earned in smaller moments. It is earned when your child says something inconvenient and you do not punish the honesty. It is earned when they disagree and your face does not close. It is earned when you can say, I do not understand yet, but I am listening. Those things sound simple. They are not always simple when you believe the direction of your family rests partly on your shoulders. For the next week, I noticed how often I corrected before I asked. It embarrassed me. One of my sons mentioned changing the way we stored tools in the workshop. I immediately told him why the current system worked. Then I stopped and asked him to explain. His idea was better. A younger daughter said she did not want to go along on an errand because she was tired. My first thought was that tiredness is not an excuse. Then I asked how late she had been awake, helping with canning the night before. Again and again, I saw the same habit. I had trained myself to answer quickly because quick answers feel like leadership. But sometimes leadership is making enough room for another person to finish. Leah did go away for a season. That was not easy for me. The morning she left, there were 2 small bags by the door and a folded coat over her arm. The house felt too quiet before she was even gone. I wanted to give her a long speech about what to remember, who to trust, how to conduct herself, how often to write. I had plenty of advice. I gave her less of it than I would have before the barn. I helped carry 1 bag outside. I told her the door was open to her, then I let her go. For the first few weeks, I wondered whether allowing that space meant I had surrendered part of my duty as a father. I do not think that now. A father's duty changes as his children become adults. When they are small, you hold their hand near the road. When they are older, you teach them how to judge the road. Eventually, they cross roads you did not choose. You can stand on the shoulder shouting every instruction you know, or you can hope the years you had together gave them enough wisdom to walk carefully. That does not mean you stop caring. It means caring has to change shape. Leah came home after several months. I will not tell you that everything became perfect. That would not be true. She had changed in some ways. So had I. There were still conversations where I felt the old defensiveness rise. There were still moments when she hesitated before speaking. Trust does not repair itself because of one good talk in a barn. But something was different. She began bringing me unfinished thoughts. That may be one of the greatest gifts an adult child can give a parent. An unfinished thought is vulnerable. It can be clumsy. It can change tomorrow. It can sound foolish. It can even be wrong. If someone trusts you with thoughts before they are polished, they believe you are safe enough to watch them think. I had not understood that before. I used to believe a father's success could be seen mostly in his children's behavior. Are they respectful? Do they work? Do they keep their commitments? Do they live according to what they were taught? Now I think there is another question. When they are confused, do they come near you or move away? That question is more uncomfortable because a child can behave well and still move away inside. I think about that whenever I pass the workbench where the broken single tree was lying. I repaired it the next morning. The wood had split where an old weakness finally gave under pressure. I cut out the damaged section, fitted new wood, drilled 2 holes, and bolted the piece together. A repair like that leaves a mark. You can see where the old wood ends and the new support begins. I used to dislike repairs that showed. I wanted the finished piece to look untouched. I do not mind them now. Some repairs should be visible. They remind you not to pretend nothing happened. If I could return to the months before that barn conversation, I would not ask my daughter to be different. I would ask myself to become easier to approach. I would sit longer at the table after supper. I would ask questions that did not have a correct answer. I would listen without arranging my response while she spoke. And when I disagreed, I would make sure she understood that disagreement did not threaten her place in my home. I still lead my household. I still believe a father should have convictions. I still believe children need boundaries when they are young and honest guidance when they are grown. But conviction does not require a closed door. If anything, a strong conviction should make a man less afraid of hearing questions. That is what I understand now. My daughter did not fail me by bringing doubts into the barn. She trusted me enough to bring them at all. I was the one who had failed to make that easier, and I am grateful she gave me the chance to see it while there was still time to change. If you are a father, a mother, or even a grown son or daughter watching this, I would like to ask you something. What makes a parent feel safe to tell the truth to, especially when the truth might disappoint them? Leave your answer in the comments if you are willing. I read more of those thoughts than you may realize. And if you want more stories about Amish family life, work, faith, and the lessons that do not always come easily, you are welcome to subscribe. I will keep telling them as plainly as I know how.